Do you ever think about those homemade Christmas candies no one makes anymore? The ones that once filled whole houses with excitement? For mid-century families, these Christmas candies came from real effort and flavors that made the holidays feel special. When did we let moments like that slip away? There was a time when divinity candy sat on Christmas tables like something sent from the heavens. And back then, people treated it with the same reverence they gave to holiday hymns. Divinity was not just cooked, it was summoned. You needed a cold, dry day, a calm kitchen, and a whole lot of patience, because one wrong move would turn those soft white clouds into sticky little disasters that refused to hold their shape. Folks today do not realize just how dramatic candy making used to be. Imagine standing over a bubbling pot of sugar syrup, checking the thread stage with nothing but your eyes because candy thermometers were still a luxury. Then you had to pour that lava stream into whipped egg whites at just the right speed or you would ruin it all. And once the candy finally came together, you had seconds to scoop it into neat little mounds before it hardened like cement. Yet when it worked, it was magic. Soft, airy, delicate, and sweet in a way that tasted like snowfall and church choirs. People stopped making it because life got busier and weather never cooperated, but if you ever had real divinity melt on your tongue, you know why families still talk about it like a lost miracle. Peanut brittle was one of those candies that made a whole neighborhood smell like Christmas the moment someone poured that molten sugar onto a buttered pan. You could hear it before you saw it too, that sharp crack when someone tapped it with the back of a spoon to test if it had cooled. Back then, making peanut brittle was basically a holiday event that pulled the whole family into the kitchen, whether they planned to help or not. You had to stir that sugar mixture until it turned golden, hoping it did not scorch and ruin the whole batch. The moment you added baking soda, the pot foamed up like a messy science experiment, and everyone either cheered or jumped back a little. Then came the race to spread it thin before it hardened. Some people used wooden spoons, others used their hands wrapped in buttered paper, and some just relied on experience. Once cooled, it cracked into glassy sheets filled with roasted peanuts that always tasted better in December. Store-bought versions exist, but none compared to the loud, sweet, handmade brittle that defined old Christmas kitchens. Molasses pull taffy was the kind of candy that transformed the entire household into willing labor because making it took more hands than one person wanted to admit. It began with molasses bubbling on the stove until the kitchen smelled like warm sugar and winter spices. But once it was poured onto a buttered tray, the real chaos began. Children would appear instantly, hands already buttered, ready to pull the taffy even if they had ignored every other chore that day. You stretched the warm rope over and over, folding and twisting it until it lightened into a golden striped ribbon. The room filled with laughter, complaints, and the occasional sticky disaster when someone lost their grip. Long strands were draped over chairs to cool, and the whole house smelled like homemade sweetness. People do not make pull taffy anymore because it takes time, energy, and strong wrists, but older generations still remember it as one of the last truly hands-on Christmas candies, the kind that tasted like effort and family. Potato candy rolls were the kind of Christmas treat that made people raise an eyebrow until they tasted one, and then suddenly they wanted the recipe like it was magic. These candies came from a time when nothing went to waste, not even leftover mashed potatoes. Mothers mixed those cold potatoes with powdered sugar until a dough formed, something that amazed every child watching. After rolling it flat, they spread peanut butter on top and rolled it into a tight log. Sliced into spirals, each piece looked like a fancy cookie, even though it was made from the humblest ingredients. Children loved them, adults appreciated them, and they were perfect when budgets were tight, but spirits were high. Today, people turn their noses up at the idea, forgetting what creativity and resourcefulness can taste like. But anyone who grew up with those sweet little spirals knows they had a charm no store-bought candy could ever match. Maraschino cherry fudge was the Christmas candy that looked like it belonged in a stained glass window, thanks to those bright red cherry pieces inside every square. You saw it at potlucks and family gatherings, always stealing attention from the cookies around it. Making it started with warming condensed milk with chocolate until thick and glossy, and then came the cherries. Someone would chop them into tiny pieces, their syrup staining cutting boards and fingertips alike. When stirred in, the fudge turned, swirled, and festive, bubbling softly as it thickened. Once cooled, it formed creamy slices that tasted cheerful and sweet in a way modern desserts rarely do. People stopped making it because trends changed and polished desserts took over, but this fudge had personality. It was bold, bright, messy, and joyful, and every bite tasted like childhood Christmas. Vinegar taffy confused people until they tasted it, and then the flavor clicked instantly. The vinegar was never meant to make it sour. It simply balanced the sweetness and added a subtle tang that older generations loved. Before flavored extracts became common, families relied on pantry staples, and vinegar was one of the few ingredients that transformed sugar without overpowering it. You heated the mixture, added that splash of vinegar, and waited for it to reach the perfect stage. Once cool enough, families pulled the taffy until it grew pale and glossy. Some added vanilla or lemon when they had it, but the flavor was always unmistakably simple and comforting. Vinegar taffy faded away as modern candy aisles became filled with bold colors and loud flavors, but this candy belonged to a quieter Christmas. It tasted like resourcefulness and tradition wrapped in sweetness. Peppermint stick bark looked like Christmas had shattered into little edible pieces, and for years it was one of the easiest candies families made. Before bark became polished and commercial, it was something homemade and joyfully messy. Someone would crush peppermint sticks inside a towel with a rolling pin, filling the room with the scent of mint. Then white chocolate was melted slowly on the stove, stirred until smooth, and mixed with those peppermint shards until the whole pot sparkled. Spread on a baking sheet and cooled, it broke into uneven pieces that tasted crisp and wintry. Children loved the crunch, adults loved the nostalgia, and everyone loved how something so simple felt so festive. Store-bought bark exists now, but homemade versions had charm in their imperfections. It was a reminder that Christmas candy did not need to be fancy. It just needed someone willing to make a sweet little mess in the kitchen. Buttermilk pralines were the kind of Southern Christmas candy that tasted like a warm porch swing, a family story passed down, and pure holiday comfort all wrapped into one sugary mound. The recipe looked simple on paper, but anyone who tried making pralines without supervision quickly learned that simplicity was a lie. You had to cook the mixture low and slow, letting the buttermilk, sugar, and butter bubble together until they reached a color that older cooks called just right. No thermometer could tell you that shade, only experience could. Once the pecans were stirred in, the mixture thickened into something rich and creamy, and you had to work fast before it hardened in the pot. People would drop spoonfuls onto wax paper, the pralines spreading slightly as they cooled into little caramel-colored discs with craggy tops. They tasted like brown sugar, toasted nuts, and holidays spent with people who knew how to make something out of nothing. Modern pralines exist in stores now, but they are smooth, tidy, and missing that old-fashioned soul. Buttermilk pralines had personality because the buttermilk added a tangy depth that made them memorable. Older generations made them every December, sometimes as gifts, sometimes for family, and sometimes just because the weather felt right. Over the years, people stopped making them, partly because the process took time and partly because the candy industry swallowed everything homemade. But anyone who has tasted a real buttermilk praline knows why they were worth the trouble. Each bite tasted like memory, patience, and the quiet pride of creating something special without needing anything fancy. Hardtack. Christmas candy was the sparkling jewel of holiday tables, especially in the mid-20th century when homemade candies meant more than anything wrapped in foil. The process looked almost like magic to children. You heated sugar, water, and corn syrup until the mixture turned clear and glass-like, then added bright colors and simple flavors that filled the house with scents of cinnamon, clove, or wintergreen. Once the syrup reached that boiling point of no return, you poured it onto a buttered pan and waited for it to cool just long enough to cut. But here was the part that made it special. You dusted the finished cubes in powdered sugar so they would not stick together, and suddenly you had a bowl full of tiny stained glass windows that seemed too pretty to eat. Hardtack candy became a symbol of the season because it was cheap, cheerful, and long-lasting. It sat in candy dishes for weeks, ready for guests, children, or whoever wandered by. You rarely see people making it today because it requires patience, precision, and a certain tolerance for sticky countertops. Candy stores still sell versions of it, but the homemade kind had a subtle warmth, a simpler sweetness, and a charm that commercial versions cannot imitate. Hardtack was the kind of candy you remembered long after the tree came down, partly for its taste and partly for how it made the season feel fuller. Coconut haystacks were one of the simplest Christmas candies ever created, but they tasted like 100 tiny holiday miracles stacked together. Made from shredded coconut mixed with warm sugar syrup, they were the candy equivalent of childhood scribbles, messy, uneven, and absolutely perfect. Mothers loved how easy they were to prepare when time and ingredients were limited, and children loved how they looked like little snowy mounds waiting to be snatched from the tray. You just heated the syrup, stirred in the coconut until every strand glistened, and dropped spoonfuls onto wax paper to set. No tricks, no thermometers, no weather conditions required. Despite their simplicity, haystacks carried the same excitement as more complicated candies because they tasted like pure sweetness and holiday energy. They were popular across the country, especially in homes where budgets were tight and store-bought treats were luxuries. Over time, they faded from Christmas tables as more elaborate desserts took their place, but older generations still talk about them with the same affection as childhood toys and snowy mornings. Coconut haystacks captured the heart of homemade Christmas candy: cheap, cheerful, and made with love instead of precision. Maple cream candies were the kind of Christmas treat that felt almost too delicate to touch, the sort of candy you picked up with 2 fingers because you were afraid of ruining its perfect little shape. Back when holiday molds were pulled out only once a year, families would make batch after batch of these maple-scented treasures, pouring warm maple cream into tiny molds shaped like angels, bells, trees, or snowflakes. There was nothing artificial about them, nothing rushed or store-bought. Just pure maple syrup cooked slowly with butter and a little cream until it thickened enough to take form. Older cooks knew exactly when to remove the pot from the heat because the scent changed slightly and the bubbles grew heavier. Children would hover close by, praying aloud that someone would let them scrape the sides of the pot once the molds were filled. When the candies cooled, they popped out smooth and pale, each one melting the moment it touched your tongue. The taste was rich but somehow light, like maple sugar dissolved into snow. These candies were often packed into little tins and given to teachers, neighbors, or grandparents, each tin tied with ribbon and smelling faintly like winter cabins and warm kitchens. People do not make maple cream candies as often today because real maple syrup is expensive and patience is in shorter supply than ever. But older generations still talk about them as the candy that made Christmas feel elegant, homemade, and full of intention. They were the kind of treat that asked you to slow down, breathe in the moment, and savor a sweetness that came entirely from nature. They tasted like the quiet side of Christmas, the part that lived in small traditions and thoughtful hands. Old-time opera fudge was the kind of candy that vanished the second it touched your tongue, which made it feel almost magical to anyone lucky enough to try it. It was silky and impossibly light, often served at church bazaars where older women carried the recipe in their heads rather than in any book. Opera fudge was not made like modern chocolate fudge. It started with sugar, cream, and butter, cooked slowly until it reached a stage that required perfect timing. Once the syrup cooled slightly, it was beaten until it thickened and turned matte, taking on its signature texture. Children whispered about whether it would set right this time because opera fudge was unpredictable and dramatic. When it came out correctly, it tasted like soft clouds of vanilla cream. People stopped making it because it demanded patience and precision, and store-bought versions never captured its softness. Those who remember it still talk about it like a first snowfall, something beautiful and fleeting. Chocolate-covered orange peel was one of those Christmas treats that turned something ordinary into something extraordinary. Before stores sold candied citrus, families peeled oranges in long strips and simmered the rinds in sugar syrup until they softened and glowed. The house filled with the smell of citrus and warm syrup, and children poked at the pot hoping the pieces were ready. Once dried, the peels were dipped in melted chocolate, dark, or milk, depending on what the pantry allowed. The combination was unforgettable: bitter peel, bright orange flavor, and smooth chocolate. Families once set trays near cold windows to help the chocolate harden. The tradition faded as candy making became commercial, but this treat still carries the charm of quieter holidays when nothing went to waste. Pecan log rolls were the kind of Christmas candy that made children stare wide-eyed at every slice. They began with a soft nougat or marshmallow center, something sweet and pillowy. Then warm caramel wrapped around it until the whole thing glowed golden. Chopped pecans waited on a board, and rolling the caramel-covered log across them was the best part, covering every inch in crunchy nuts. The mix of soft center, chewy caramel, and crisp pecans made each bite feel like 3 candies in one. Families made them in big batches, wrapping them in wax paper and storing them in tins. Making them was messy, loud, and fun. Store-bought versions exist now, but homemade rolls tasted fresher and warmer, filled with real holiday effort. They were more than candy. They were tradition shaped by hand. Caramel pecan turtles were holiday treasures long before companies boxed them in shiny wrappers. The homemade kind began with clusters of pecans arranged on a buttered sheet like tiny turtles with little legs. Warm caramel was spooned over the top, filling the gaps and creating a chewy golden blanket. Once the caramel cooled, each piece was dipped in chocolate, turning simple ingredients into something rich. Families made these every December, often using pecans from their own yards. Children hovered close, hoping for a piece too messy to save. Homemade turtles were never perfect, which made them even better. Mass-produced versions cannot capture the warmth of a kitchen filled with chocolate, caramel, and patience. For many families, turtles were the moment Christmas felt real. Cream cheese mints were the soft pastel candies that looked like tiny ornaments on Christmas tables. Made from cream cheese, powdered sugar, and peppermint, they were both refreshing and sweet, like winter air wrapped in sugar. Children scooped the dough into small balls, pressed them into little molds, and dusted them with sugar. Each mint came out with delicate patterns shaped like bells or trees. They dried just enough to form a light shell while staying soft inside. These mints showed up at gatherings, weddings, church socials, and anywhere a pretty candy was needed. They were simple, cheap, and festive. Over time, the tradition faded, but older generations remember them as a symbol of homemade hospitality. They tasted like nostalgia in pastel form. Popcorn balls with molasses syrup were the sticky, unforgettable treats that defined Christmas in homes where money was tight, but joy was strong. Fresh popcorn filled the biggest bowl in the kitchen, and molasses syrup simmered until it smelled deep and warm. Adults poured the hot syrup over the popcorn and stirred with wooden spoons. Once it cooled slightly, everyone buttered their hands and shaped the mixture into balls, laughing at the mess. Some came out round, others lopsided, but all tasted like comfort. Wrapped in wax paper, they were given to neighbors or packed for school. Popcorn balls disappeared over time because molasses lost popularity, but anyone who remembers them knows how special they were. They tasted like togetherness you could hold in your hands. Seafoam candy amazed children long before anyone explained the science behind it. Sugar and corn syrup simmered until amber, and then baking soda was added in one dramatic instant. The mixture erupted into foamy bubbles, rising like a living thing. Once poured onto a pan, it cooled into airy honeycomb filled with tiny holes. Some families dipped pieces in chocolate, others ate it plain, enjoying its light crunch. Seafoam was a Christmas specialty because it took timing and a steady hand. Children loved cracking it with a rolling pin and watching it break cleanly. It faded away as candies became mass-produced, but for older generations, seafoam was a reminder that simple ingredients could still create wonder. It tasted like winter magic made at home. Chocolate-covered potato chips were a sweet and salty secret tradition in many Midwest homes. Before snack companies copied the idea, families dipped sturdy potato chips into melted chocolate right in their own kitchens. The hardest part was choosing chips thick enough to survive the dip. Someone melted chocolate on the stove, while others sorted through the pile, picking the best ones. The mix of salty crunch and sweet chocolate was addictive and felt almost mischievous. These treats appeared at Christmas parties when families wanted something fun and unexpected. They were quick, imperfect, and made with laughter. Over time, companies sold their own versions, but the homemade ones had a charm machines could not mimic. They tasted like joy with a hint of rebellion. Spiced rock candy on strings was one of the most magical Christmas crafts older generations remembered, because the candy literally grew before your eyes. It began with a jar of sugar syrup flavored with cinnamon, clove, or peppermint, heated until the sugar dissolved completely. A piece of string was tied around a pencil or a stick, lowered into the jar, and left in a warm corner of the kitchen. Over the next few days, crystals formed along the string, growing bigger each morning like tiny sugar icicles. Children would run to check the jars the moment they woke up, amazed that candy could appear from nothing but patience and science. Once the crystals reached the right size, the strings were pulled from the jars and left to dry, sparkling like Christmas decorations. Rock candy was a simple treat, affordable and exciting, especially in homes where store-bought candy was rare. Spiced versions were a holiday favorite because they filled the jar with warmth and fragrance long before the candy was ready. People stopped making rock candy as kitchens grew busier, but those who remember it still smile at the memory of growing their own sweets. It tasted like childhood curiosity and Christmas wonder suspended on a string. Rum balls rolled in cocoa were the kind of Christmas candy that adults claimed were for the grown folks, even though every child tried sneaking one when no one was looking. They were made from crushed vanilla wafers, cocoa, nuts if you had them, and whatever holiday flavoring the family kept tucked away for special occasions. The mixture turned into a soft dough that stuck to your palms, and shaping it into little balls was half the fun. Rolling them in cocoa made them look fancier than they really were, and families kept them stored in tins that rattled every time someone lifted the lid to just check. Their flavor deepened as they sat, turning richer and stronger with every passing day until Christmas morning finally arrived. No one makes them much anymore because store-bought candies drowned out homemade traditions, but for older generations, rum balls still taste like grown-up Christmas in a single bite. Peanut butter fudge bars were the candy that disappeared from holiday plates faster than anything else, mostly because children circled the dessert table like hungry little satellites. Back before fancy peanut butter cups and packaged sweets took over, these bars were the main event. You melted butter, sugar, and milk on the stove, stirred in a generous scoop of peanut butter, and watched the whole mixture turn thick and glossy. When you poured it into a pan and let it cool, it set into dense squares that tasted like the richest peanut butter imaginable. Every bite stuck to the roof of your mouth in the best way, sweet and creamy and warming. People stopped making them once candy aisles grew louder and more crowded, but these old-fashioned bars still hold a place in the memories of anyone who grew up watching a parent scrape the last bit of fudge from the pot with a wooden spoon. Old-fashioned cream fudge was a test of patience disguised as a holiday recipe, and every seasoned cook treated it like a quiet competition with themselves. You could not rush it, cheat it, or distract yourself. You had to stand over that pot, stirring slowly as sugar and cream thickened into something rich and silky. Too hot and it would turn grainy, too cool and it would never set, which meant you needed steady hands and a careful eye. When it finally reached the perfect stage, you beat it until it lost its shine and turned into a soft, velvety mass ready to pour into a waiting pan. The fudge cooled into creamy blocks that melted on the tongue like sweet winter snow. No shortcut version ever recreated its texture, and most people stopped making it because store-bought fudge felt easier. But for anyone who remembers that slow, careful stirring, cream fudge still represents the kind of Christmas effort we rarely see today. Coconut ice was the cheerful little candy that looked like it came straight out of a storybook thanks to its pink and white layers. It showed up in mid-century cookbooks everywhere, especially those that loved simple recipes that stretched ingredients as far as possible. Coconut, sugar, and milk were mixed into a thick, sweet dough, pressed into a pan and split into two halves so that one could be tinted the softest holiday pink. After it chilled, the slab was sliced into neat squares that looked like tiny edible presents. Children loved the color, adults loved the sweetness, and everyone agreed it felt special despite its humble ingredients. You do not see coconut ice much anymore, maybe because modern desserts prefer elegance over charm. But for the families who made it, one bite still brings back the gentler holidays of the 1950s and 1960s. Chocolate-dipped marshmallows were one of the easiest candies to make, but somehow they still managed to feel like luxury during the holidays. Back then, families made marshmallows at home, cutting soft squares from a powdered pan and coating their fingertips in sugar. Once dipped in warm melted chocolate, they cooled into glossy treats that tasted far richer than anything from a bag. Children hovered nearby waiting for permission to eat the ones that were not pretty enough for the Christmas plate. Every bite was soft, melty, and full of winter sweetness. Modern store-bought marshmallows dip just fine, but they cannot compete with the charm of the homemade squares that wobbled when you picked them up. They were simple, festive, and perfect, which is exactly why so many people wish they still appeared on today's holiday tables. Honey walnut pralines were a Depression-era holdover that survived well into the mid-century because they were affordable, filling, and tasted far more extravagant than they cost. Honey simmered with sugar until it thickened, then walnuts were stirred in until each one was coated in a glossy amber shell. When spooned onto a tray to cool, they set into chewy clusters that smelled like warm nuts and sweetness. Families made them when times were tight, and even when things improved, the flavor was so comforting that people kept the tradition alive. Their sweetness was subtle, their texture a perfect blend of soft and crisp. Today, they rarely appear outside of old handwritten recipe cards, but older generations still smile when they remember how something so simple could taste so generous. Peppermint nougat squares were the soft, chewy gems of the Christmas candy plate, the ones that stretched just slightly when you bit into them. Making them took steady heat and careful timing as sugar syrup cooked until it reached that perfect temperature. Crushed peppermint sticks were stirred in while the mixture was still warm, tinting the whole batch a soft pink and filling the kitchen with a cool winter scent. Once poured and cooled, it cut into neat squares that melted slowly on the tongue, equal parts sweet and minty. Children loved the color, adults loved the nostalgia, and the whole family appreciated how something so small could hold so much holiday cheer. They disappeared over time as nougat became a store-bought filler instead of a homemade treasure. But these old squares still represent the gentler side of Christmas candy making. Candied pecans coated in brown sugar glaze were the kind of Christmas treat that made every room in the house smell warm and welcoming. Pecans toasted gently in a skillet while sugar, butter, and spices melted into a thick, bubbling syrup. When poured over the nuts, the glaze clung to every ridge until it hardened into a glossy shell. The result was crunchy, sweet, and just a little salty, the kind of snack people reached for without realizing how many they had eaten. Families wrapped them in wax paper or stored them in old tins for gifting, and anyone who received them knew they had been made with real care. You can buy candied nuts in stores now, but none of them carry the warmth of the homemade version cooked on a stovetop in a busy holiday kitchen. Burnt sugar caramels were the candy maker's challenge, because 1 second too long on the stove turned sweet sugar into a smoky, bitter mess. But when someone got it right, the result was something unforgettable. The sugar deepened into a rich brown before cream was added, causing a dramatic hiss that startled half the room. Once stirred smooth, the mixture thickened into a caramel with a depth of flavor no regular candy could match. Poured into a pan and cut into sticky squares, each piece tasted dark, warm, and just a little mysterious. People stopped making them because they required attention and courage, but those who remember them know they were worth every nervous moment at the stove. Chocolate fudge layered with marshmallow creme was the kind of candy that made every child hover in the doorway, waiting for the pan to cool. Before pre-made mixes simplified everything, fudge had to be made slowly on the stovetop, stirred until thick and glossy. A layer of marshmallow creme added sweetness and softness, turning the whole treat into a perfect blend of creamy and chewy. When sliced, the squares showed two distinct layers that looked like something from a holiday magazine. It tasted rich, smooth, and comforting, the kind of candy that disappeared long before guests arrived. People rarely make it now, but for many families, this layered fudge was the true taste of Christmas. Pigs in a blanket were pure happiness wrapped in crescent dough. Little cocktail sausages tucked into golden pastry, brushed with butter, baked until puffed and warm. No appetizer vanished faster. People hovered near the oven just to grab them fresh off the tray. You could hear the laughter and smell the nostalgia before they even reached the table. They were the snack that broke down barriers, eaten by everyone from kids in footy pajamas to grandparents sipping eggnog. The texture was soft yet crisp, the taste salty, buttery, and deeply comforting. Each one disappeared in 2 bites, followed by that inevitable reach for another. You could dip them in mustard, ketchup, or nothing at all. They were perfect either way. In a decade obsessed with convenience and joy, pigs in a blanket delivered both. They were bite-sized celebration, proof that the simplest things are sometimes the most unforgettable. Cornflake Christmas wreaths were sticky, sweet, and green, the kind of treat that made every child's eyes light up in the 1960s. They were crafted from melted marshmallows, butter, and cornflakes, tinted with food coloring and dotted with tiny red candies. Simple, messy, and irresistible, these wreaths were a mother's quick solution for something festive without breaking the budget. Children shaped them by hand, their fingers coated in syrupy sugar, while laughter filled the kitchen. No one cared if they looked uneven or stuck to the wax paper. The fun was in the making. These little wreaths symbolized everything pure about mid-century Christmas joy, creativity, resourcefulness, and togetherness. They cooled on countertops, glistening like ornaments you could eat, waiting to be carried to school parties or shared after church. They might not appear on holiday tables today, replaced by sleek desserts and store-bought cookies, but their memory lingers like the sound of wrapping paper and carols. One bite could still take anyone back to the warmth of a simpler season. Clabber Girl baking powder was the silent partner behind every successful holiday morning. Grandma trusted that red and white can more than any recipe book. She said it never failed her, and it never did. Whether she was making fluffy biscuits, golden pancakes, or quick breads, that little can made them rise perfectly every time. You could hear the faint fizz as it hit the wet ingredients, a quiet sign that breakfast would soon fill the house with warmth. Clabber Girl sat beside the flour, slightly dusty but dignified, always there when she needed it. She never waited to buy it because Christmas baking without it was unthinkable. The biscuits it made were tall and tender, the kind that melted under butter and honey. Every bite reminded you of patience and practice, the kind of holiday magic that came from doing things the right way. Reynolds aluminum foil in its holiday pack was as much a Christmas essential as tinsel or lights. Grandma bought rolls of it early, certain the stores would sell out before Christmas week. The box had a shimmer to it, promising perfection in every roast and pie. She lined pans, covered turkeys, and wrapped leftovers with military precision. When she folded foil over pies, the crimped edges looked like silver lace. It caught the glow of the kitchen light, reflecting warmth and order in the middle of chaos. Even wrapping leftovers felt festive when done with Reynolds foil. Grandma said it kept food fresher, but maybe it just kept things feeling special. By the end of the season, the empty box was proof of a well-fed family and a job done right. Mock pecan pie was the Depression-era dessert that refused to give up sweetness. When real pecans were too expensive, cooks used oats, breadcrumbs, or crushed crackers instead. Mixed with brown sugar and syrup, the filling baked into a chewy, caramel-like layer that mimicked the flavor and texture of the real thing. The crust was often handmade, rolled thin to save flour, but still tender from lard or shortening. For many, it wasn't just a substitute. It was a small act of defiance against scarcity. Families cut into it proudly, knowing they'd turned less into something that felt like enough. Mock pecan pie was the proof that celebration could exist even when times were hard. Though forgotten today, it once symbolized resilience baked golden brown. Mock duck with apples and onions was the Depression-era miracle that turned scarcity into abundance. Born from necessity, it was a dish of imagination, a roast without the roast. Families who couldn't afford duck crafted their own version from ground pork, beef, or even beans, rolling it tight with breadcrumbs, herbs, and seasoning before baking it alongside sliced apples and onions. The result was tender, savory, and slightly sweet, its aroma filling the air with the illusion of feast and plenty. The apples softened into tangy sweetness, the onions caramelized to gold, and together they transformed humble meat into something grand. Housewives took pride in serving it, knowing it offered both flavor and dignity when little else could. It sliced beautifully, holding its shape like a fine roast, and was often garnished with a sprig of parsley or a drizzle of pan juices to make it shine. Served with mashed potatoes or turnip greens, it turned an ordinary Sunday into a celebration. Mock duck wasn't just clever, it was emotional alchemy, turning want into joy, hardship into grace. Though few make it now, the dish lives on in the stories of those who endured and triumphed with ingenuity as their secret ingredient. Mock duck with apples and onions was survival elevated to art. Spinach puffs were buttery little miracles. Flaky pastry squares filled with spinach, cream cheese, and dreams of sophistication. They puffed up golden in the oven, sending out a smell so rich it felt like comfort dressed in evening wear. Each one disappeared in 2 bites, creamy inside, crisp outside, perfectly balanced. They looked fancy but came straight from frozen pastry and pantry staples, a hallmark of 1980s brilliance. You could find them on every holiday table, from office buffets to family reunions, neatly stacked on platters beside mini quiches and pigs in a blanket. They were the kind of food that made you feel proud to serve, the kind that made store-bought taste homemade. Spinach puffs were elegance within reach, warm, flaky, and unforgettable. They turned ordinary kitchens into banquet halls and made even the simplest host feel like royalty. Fruitcake icebox cookies were the quieter cousin of the famous fruitcake, but in many kitchens, they were even more beloved. These cookies required no baking at all, just crushed graham crackers, condensed milk, and bits of candied fruit mixed together and chilled until firm. The recipe was the perfect solution for busy homemakers balancing work, family, and a holiday meal that needed to stretch far. Each bite tasted like nostalgia, soft, chewy, and filled with the flavors of spice and sugar that marked the season. They were stored in tins or waxed paper and handed out with care, the kind of treat that improved with time. Fruitcake icebox cookies proved that you did not need an oven to make something that tasted like Christmas. They were quick, clever, and comforting, a glimpse into an age where every ingredient mattered and every crumb carried love. Today, they have all but vanished, replaced by store-bought trays and glossy desserts. But somewhere, a grandmother still remembers how the kitchen smelled when the first batch set in the cold. Snowdrift. Vegetable shortening was not glamorous, but to Grandma it was gold. She trusted that white can more than any fancy new butter or oil. It made pie crusts flaky, cookies soft, and cakes impossibly light. The can itself looked festive, simple and proud, a kitchen staple that carried its weight in Christmas spirit. Grandma measured it with her eyes, scooping it cleanly and smoothing it with the back of a knife like a ritual. When her pies came out of the oven, golden and perfect, everyone understood why she swore by it. Snowdrift was the kind of ingredient that held up families and traditions at once. It was steady, humble, and completely irreplaceable. McCormick Red Cinnamon Drops were the candy that snuck its way into everything. Grandma kept a jar of them for cookies, cider, and even decorations. The color alone made her smile, tiny red gems that sparkled like Christmas lights. She would press one into the center of sugar cookies or drop a handful into her simmering cider until the kitchen smelled like pure warmth. They melted slowly, tinting drinks a deep ruby and leaving a faint heat that lingered on your tongue. It was a small touch, but it made everything feel more alive. Children loved them for their color. Adults loved them for the nostalgia. McCormick cinnamon drops were a reminder that even the smallest things could make a holiday shine brighter. Sometimes Grandma would crush a few to mix into frosting, leaving little bursts of spice in every bite. Other times, she strung them like beads onto cookie ribbons to hang on the tree. The house smelled like sugar and cinnamon for days. They were candy, decoration, and memory all at once. A simple pleasure that carried an entire season inside its sweetness. In the middle of a busy holiday kitchen, those tiny red drops caught the light and made even the plainest moments feel special. Jell-O cottage cheese salad was the bright, quirky side dish that defined mid-century optimism. Lime gelatin mixed with cottage cheese, crushed pineapple, and sometimes walnuts or celery. It was a combination that sounded odd but tasted delightfully fresh. The green shimmer made it a cheerful pop on Thanksgiving tables, especially against the browns and golds of the feast. Housewives loved it because it was affordable, reliable, and eye-catching. Served molded or scooped onto lettuce leaves, it represented a time when presentation meant everything. Sweet and savory blended in every bite, the texture light yet satisfying. Though it's vanished from most modern menus, Jell-O cottage cheese salad still holds a certain charm, a snapshot of when American dining dared to be playful. It was the color of joy on a plate, unashamedly bright and wonderfully nostalgic. Molasses pecan pie was the Deep South's answer to richness with soul, a dessert that carried history in every dark, sticky bite. Instead of corn syrup, it relied on molasses, giving the pie a flavor that was smoky, bittersweet, and deeply rooted in the soil that grew both its sugarcane and its pecans. Each slice shimmered beneath candlelight, its filling thick and glossy, its scent a mix of toasted nuts, caramel, and earth. The crust, flaky and browned, framed the dense, syrupy middle like a work of art. This wasn't just a sweet treat. It was a story of frugality and flavor intertwined, of cooks who understood that depth mattered more than excess. Families adapted their recipes from one generation to the next, each adding a personal touch, more molasses for bite, more butter for silk, more pecans for pride. Served warm with a dollop of whipped cream, it felt like the world had slowed down for a moment of indulgence. Molasses pecan pie embodied Southern resilience, blending hardship and abundance into one perfect harmony. Today, its dark richness is rarely seen on modern tables, replaced by lighter, easier desserts. But those who tasted it know it wasn't just dessert, it was devotion made edible. Mini sausage stuffed mushrooms were the gourmet secret weapon of 1980s hosts. Button mushrooms, hollowed out and filled with spicy sausage, breadcrumbs, and cheese, baked until bubbling and golden brown. The smell alone made guests drift toward the kitchen. They looked elegant, tasted rich, and felt like something straight from a restaurant menu. Each bite was a burst of flavor, savory, creamy, and satisfying. They were proof that you didn't need training to cook something impressive. You just needed an oven and courage. The host would serve them proudly on a platter, smiling as they vanished within minutes. For many families, these mushrooms were the first fancy appetizer they ever made. They turned ordinary kitchens into holiday showcases and small moments into memories. Stuffed mushrooms were where ambition met comfort, perfectly baked and perfectly 1980s. Divinity candy was the measure of a good cook's patience. One wrong move, too much humidity, a second too long on the stove, and the delicate meringue would collapse into a sticky mess. But when done right, Divinity was heaven itself. Airy, white, and kissed with vanilla, sometimes folded with nuts or coconut for texture. It was a candy that felt alive under your fingers, cooling into soft clouds that melted on the tongue. Making it was a holiday ritual, requiring timing, precision, and quiet concentration. Mothers and daughters would whisper over the pot, testing the syrup's readiness with practiced eyes. When the mixture reached perfection, it was spooned onto wax paper in little peaks, each one a triumph. Divinity was not flashy, but it carried a quiet grace, a symbol of the care and love poured into every Christmas kitchen. Today, few dare to attempt it, but those who do understand that the name was no exaggeration. Ginger snap crumbs were Grandma's secret ingredient long before anyone called it clever. She used them for pie crusts instead of graham crackers, crushing them with a rolling pin until the kitchen smelled like warm spice and molasses. Lemon pies, pumpkin pies, even cheesecake, all of them got a ginger snap base in her hands. The flavor added a kick that balanced the sweetness perfectly. You could taste the Christmas spirit in every crumb, ginger, cinnamon, and just a whisper of heat. She never bought pre-made crusts, claiming they lacked character. Instead, she pressed those crumbs by hand into pans, humming while she worked. The edges browned beautifully in the oven, crisp and fragrant, making every dessert feel more alive. When guests asked for her recipe, she always said it was nothing special, though everyone knew it was. Those crumbs were proof that even leftovers from a cookie jar could build something unforgettable. The crunch was just right, sturdy but tender, like a memory that refuses to fade. She saved every broken cookie from tins throughout December, knowing they would find a second life. It was resourcefulness disguised as creativity, and it gave her desserts a story baked into every bite. No one ever looked at pie the same way again after hers. Pumpkin chiffon pie brought lightness to a holiday known for richness. Created in the post-war era, it reimagined the classic pumpkin pie into something airy and elegant. The filling was whipped with egg whites or gelatin, giving it a soft, cloud-like texture that melted in the mouth. It represented innovation, America's shift toward modern, refined desserts. Housewives embraced it as the perfect blend of tradition and progress, offering all the pumpkin flavor without the heaviness. The glossy, golden filling sat in a flaky crust, often topped with whipped cream swirls. Served chilled, it was a refreshing finish to a day of feasting. As time went on, traditional pies reclaimed the spotlight, and this airy cousin quietly disappeared. But for a few shining decades, pumpkin chiffon pie was Thanksgiving sophistication on a plate, a reminder that even old traditions can take flight. Cranberry orange relish with walnuts was Thanksgiving brightness in its purest form. Before canned cranberry sauce became a staple, families would grind fresh cranberries with whole oranges, peel and all, mixing in chopped walnuts and sugar until it glowed ruby red. The result was tart, sweet, and bursting with freshness, a contrast to the rich, heavy dishes around it. Every spoonful was alive with flavor and texture, a mix of crunch and tang that woke up the palate. Prepared by hand, often with a hand-cranked grinder, it carried the satisfaction of true craftsmanship. It wasn't molded or uniform. It was vivid and real, a reflection of the season's bounty. Though it's been replaced by smooth, canned versions, the original relish remains a taste of authenticity. Cranberry orange relish with walnuts was more than a condiment. It was the sparkle of Thanksgiving, brightening every plate it touched. Cocktail rye with cream cheese and caviar was the 1980s dream of sophistication, a small-town attempt at luxury served on napkins printed with gold snowflakes. Tiny rectangles of dark bread topped with white cream cheese and dotted with black caviar, proof that anyone could feel glamorous for a night. Guests leaned in curiously, unsure whether to take one, until someone brave did and declared it surprisingly good. The contrast of salty and smooth, rich and cool was unforgettable. For a moment, every living room felt like a five-star restaurant. It was indulgence reimagined, wrapped in thrift and hope. Even if the caviar came from the grocery store, the feeling was real. It captured the 1980s dream, aspiration, creativity, and a touch of make-believe. Each bite was a celebration of what it meant to host with heart, to create elegance from imagination and turn ordinary nights into something special. Clove-spiced ham with pineapple rings was the glittering centerpiece of post-war Christmas dinners, a dish that managed to feel both elegant and practical at once. In the 1950s, every holiday table wanted to look like a magazine cover, and this ham was the shining star, scored in neat diamond patterns, studded with cloves like jewels, and dressed in sweet slices of golden pineapple held down by red cherries. The glaze of brown sugar and mustard bubbled to perfection, coating the ham in a glossy finish that filled the kitchen with a scent no candle could imitate. It was a dish of showmanship, born from an age obsessed with hospitality and abundance after years of war and rationing. Housewives took pride in presenting something that looked grand, even if it came from a can or on a tight budget. Over time, though, the pineapple rings and shiny glaze became symbols of dated taste, too flashy, too artificial for modern sensibilities. Yet for many families, that smell of cloves and caramelized fruit is still the scent of home, of laughter around a crowded table, of everything the holidays once meant. Domino brown. Sugar bricks were the kind of ingredient that made you feel powerful just breaking them apart. Grandma kept hers sealed in a tin, and when she opened it, the scent of deep molasses filled the air. The sugar was packed tight, hard enough to need a fork or spoon to loosen. It was the key to gingerbread cookies, caramel glazes, and old-fashioned baked apples that steamed on the windowsill. She measured it by instinct, not by cup, pressing it down and smiling when it held its shape. Domino brown sugar gave her desserts their soul. It made everything darker, warmer, and more alive. When she stirred it into a saucepan for glaze, the sound of the spoon scraping against the pot felt like music. Those bricks softened in her hands, melting into pure sweetness, and by the end, the whole kitchen smelled like heaven. Corn pudding was the comfort food that defined rural Thanksgiving tables. Fresh or canned corn mixed with milk, butter, and eggs created a soft, custard-like bake that melted in your mouth. Its sweetness was subtle, its texture soothing. Farmers' families loved it because it stretched easily. Cheap ingredients made rich by care. It smelled of harvest season and family warmth, served steaming beside turkey and greens. Every spoonful carried the golden taste of cornfields and patience. Some versions added a hint of nutmeg, others relied on pure simplicity. Corn pudding wasn't flashy, but it was dependable, a side dish that grounded the feast. As boxed mixes and fast foods took over, this quiet favorite faded away. But those who grew up with it know that no modern casserole can replace its gentle charm. Corn pudding was humble abundance baked to perfection. Mince pie was the grand finale of old-fashioned Thanksgivings. Spinach artichoke dip in a bread bowl was cozy luxury, bubbling hot under the glow of Christmas lights. The smell alone, garlic, cheese, and cream, pulled people from across the room. Served in a hollowed-out round loaf, it was a dish made to be shared, torn apart piece by piece. The bread edges soaked in the dip, turning every bite soft and rich. It was a meal and memory rolled into one, the kind of appetizer that made people gather close. Each spoonful felt indulgent, yet familiar, like comfort disguised as sophistication. It was the warmth of the 1980s kitchen captured in a single dish, cheesy, creamy, and endlessly comforting. It proved that hospitality didn't need polish, just heart and plenty of melted cheese. By the end of the night, all that remained was an empty crust and full stomachs, a quiet testament to the decades' love for food that brought people together. Old-fashioned prune cake was a humble masterpiece of Southern baking, dense, dark, and rich with spice. It looked plain on the surface, but each slice was moist with pure comfort. Prunes, soaked and mashed, gave it sweetness and depth long before refined sugar was affordable or common. Cinnamon, clove, and nutmeg added warmth, while buttermilk and molasses tied everything together. This was the kind of cake that aged well, improving each day it sat wrapped in paper on the counter. It was a grandmother's favorite. Never flashy, always dependable. Served at Christmas with coffee or whipped cream, it spoke of thrift, patience, and love that did not need decoration. Modern tastes might overlook it for lack of frosting, but one bite could remind anyone why the old recipes lasted so long. They filled you up, not just in body, but in heart. Instant mashed potato flakes from Idahoan were Grandma's not-so-secret trick for surviving Christmas cooking. She bought them early, stacking the boxes like treasure. They were used in casseroles, soups, and to thicken gravies when things got too thin. The flakes looked like nothing, but they transformed under her touch, turning into creamy, buttery comfort in minutes. On busy days, She mixed them with a little sour cream and chives, and everyone swore they were homemade. They were a safety net, warm, reliable, and ready for anything. Grandma never bragged about them, but she knew exactly how much easier they made her life. In the chaos of Christmas dinner, they were the quiet hero no one noticed, but everyone enjoyed. The Idahoan boxes lined her pantry shelf, symbols of practicality dressed as luxury. They freed her to focus on what really mattered: conversation, laughter, and keeping everyone fed. To her, these flakes represented modern progress wrapped in a humble package. Each serving felt like victory in disguise, a small miracle of efficiency and care. Every spoonful tasted like home, not because it was perfect, but because it was hers. Raisin pie, or funeral pie, as it was once called, carried both comfort and continuity in its humble crust. Its filling, plump raisins stewed in sugar, butter, and warm spices, formed a glossy, fragrant syrup that thickened as it baked, wrapping the fruit in golden sweetness. The pie earned its nickname because it traveled well and used shelf-stable ingredients, making it ideal for sharing at gatherings of both joy and mourning. Its aroma, cinnamon, molasses, and vanilla, was the smell of memory itself. In times before refrigeration, raisins offered sweetness when fresh fruit was out of reach, and this pie became a symbol of endurance through lean winters and hard years. At Thanksgiving, it was both dessert and remembrance, honoring those who came before through the act of baking. Each slice carried the taste of patience, the hours of slow simmering, the quiet rolling of dough, the comfort of routine. The texture was thick, sticky, and satisfying, the kind that lingered on the tongue long after the meal ended. Though today it has largely disappeared from holiday tables, its spirit remains, passed down through old cookbooks and whispered stories. Raisin pie was proof that even in loss or scarcity, sweetness could always be found and shared. Vienna sausage kebabs were pure 1980s creativity on a stick. Tiny canned sausages skewered with cubes of pineapple and glossy maraschino cherries, arranged in patterns that looked more like decorations than food. They sparkled under kitchen lights, the kind of kitsch that made every buffet feel like a celebration. Sweet, salty, and a little absurd, they balanced nostalgia and novelty in each bite. You could find them at office parties, church socials, and every Christmas Eve potluck, standing proudly on styrofoam displays covered in aluminum foil. There was something endlessly fun about eating food on a toothpick, and these kebabs knew it. They were the kind of appetizer that didn't take itself too seriously, just joy, convenience, and a flash of color. Kids loved them, adults pretended not to, and everyone reached for seconds. In a decade obsessed with presentation, Vienna sausage kebabs proved that even the simplest ingredients could feel festive when dressed in red and gold. By the time the party ended, all that remained were empty skewers and sticky fingers, a sign that whimsy never goes out of style. Gingerbread trifle was the unsung hero of old-fashioned Christmas tables, a layered dessert that married warmth and sweetness in every bite. It began with leftover gingerbread, dense, dark, and fragrant with molasses, crumbled into pieces and stacked with custard or whipped cream. Sometimes cooks added bits of stewed fruit or poured coffee over the layers for richness. The result was humble and heavenly, a dessert born from thrift and creativity. No one wasted cake back then. Everything could be repurposed into something new and comforting. The contrast of soft cake and silky custard made every spoonful taste like a memory of home. The trifle bowl itself was a display of abundance, its layers glowing through the glass like stripes of gold and brown. Modern desserts might be neater or sweeter, but few carry the same heart. Gingerbread trifle was proof that the best holiday recipes were never about perfection. They were about care, family, and the joy of turning leftovers into love. Carnation breakfast bars were Grandma's secret weapon before sunrise on Christmas morning. While the house slept, she unwrapped one, poured her coffee, and started her day. Those chewy bars were packed with oats, milk, and chocolate, everything she needed to keep going through hours of cooking. They tasted simple, comforting, and a little nostalgic, like the idea of nutrition meeting indulgence. She never told anyone that was her breakfast, but you could see the empty wrapper tucked behind the flour tin. It was her private ritual, her little moment of peace before the chaos began. Carnation bars kept her standing, smiling and humming through the morning. They were fuel made for mothers and grandmothers, the quiet strength behind every Christmas feast. They were also a glimpse into the future, a time when women began leaning on convenience without apology. That small bar symbolized independence, self-care, and quiet resilience. Between batches of cookies and roasts, she took a bite, savoring both energy and solitude. It was not fancy, but it was enough, and that was all she needed to keep Christmas running. If one of these candies stirred a memory, drop your favorite in the comments, hit like, and subscribe so we can bring more forgotten holiday sweetness back to life.